The night Eli Marwood vanished, nothing was out of place. No strange cars on the street, no unfamiliar footsteps on the gravel driveway. Just another still, ordinary spring evening in Rosewood, Ohio. The kind of quiet neighborhood where porch lights flickered on automatically, and bedtime was more of a habit than a decision. Lena Marwood, a single mother juggling long shifts at the local clinic and parenting on her own, had tucked her 7-year-old son in with the usual care. Stories, teeth brushed, and a soft warning not to play with his toy too late. Eli had grinned, curled under his rocket ship comforter, and held up his favorite object in the world, a clunky red and silver robot voice recorder with plastic arms that moved when it talked. She gave him a kiss on the forehead and whispered, "I love you more than all the stars." And he replied, "Then I love you more than the moon and Jupiter." It had become their bedtime tradition, a little contest of cosmic love. She chuckled, turned off the lamp beside his bed, and left the door slightly ajar like always, so a sliver of hallway light could keep the dark at bay. That was the last moment she saw her son. The next morning something felt wrong before Lena's feet even touched the floor. The air was colder, the kind of unnatural stillness that doesn't belong in a home with a child. She walked to Eli's room with a cup of coffee in one hand, expecting to rouse him for school. But as soon as she pushed open the door, the cup slipped from her hand and shattered against the hardwood. His bed was empty. The covers were pulled back neatly, like someone had slid out without disturbing the sheets. The robot recorder lay on its side on the floor, off. Eli never turned it off. It was his comfort, his friend, his late-night whisper partner. She called his name, once, twice. The silence pushed back. The window by his bed was open just enough to let in a draft, not shattered, not forced, just unlocked, the latch slightly turned. That detail alone would eat at Lena's soul for years. She ran through the house, every room, every corner. No Eli, no notes, no signs of a break-in, no tipped furniture, no dragging marks on the floor, no discarded clothing, no shoes missing. Everything was in its place, except the boy who should have been there. The police arrived within 20 minutes. By the time the sun had risen fully over Rosewood, yellow tape crisscrossed the Marwood property, and officers were combing the backyard with flashlights and hushed voices, as if afraid to wake the reality they were beginning to suspect. They questioned Lena. Was there a custody issue? No, Eli's father Adam had died in a car accident when Eli was 3. Any strange behavior recently? No. Any signs of Eli running away before? Never. He was 7. He was sweet. He liked string cheese and outer space and bedtime jokes. He wasn't the kind of kid who vanished. Detectives noted the open window, the absence of fingerprints, the lack of footprints outside due to dry weather. It was like the air itself had plucked Eli from the room and vanished him. Search parties were formed by afternoon. Dozens of neighbors, classmates, parents, off-duty police, and volunteers combed the nearby woods and schoolyards. Nothing. The local fire department sent drones to scan the neighborhood's drainage systems, abandoned barns, and storm tunnels. Still nothing. But one detail refused to fade. The recorder. The robot-shaped device had always been a cheap toy. It recorded voice snippets, then played them back with a tinny warble. The last time Lena had heard it was the night before. She remembered Eli whispering into it, "You can stay with me tonight?" then giggling like he was telling a secret. But now the recorder was off. Not out of batteries, just off. Lena would later say that's what chilled her the most. Eli never turned it off. He sometimes even fell asleep mid-sentence, the little robot muttering nonsense into the quiet as he dozed. For it to be neatly placed on the floor, powered down, felt wrong. The news spread fast. "Boy vanishes from bedroom," read the local headlines. TV crews arrived. National media caught the scent. But within a week, the headlines shifted. Another story, another missing child, another family in grief. The public moved on. But Lena didn't. She stayed in the house, refused to repaint the walls, kept his room exactly as he left it. Every birthday, she baked a cake and placed a single candle beside his window, still slightly ajar. She memorized every word he ever wrote. She'd sometimes listen to old videos on her phone, his voice echoing back at her from those final days. And she'd stare at the recorder. Over the years, it became more than a toy. It was a placeholder, a silent witness. She kept it on her nightstand. She never turned it on again. But she never threw it away. What happened to Eli Marwood remains one of the strangest missing persons cases in Ohio history. No evidence, no motive, no clue, not even a false lead. Just a boy, a mother, a toy, and a quiet night that broke everything. Where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments, because what happens next changes everything. The second day of Eli's disappearance felt heavier than the first. Sleep had come to no one, not Lena, not the police officers cycling through the scene, not the neighbors who had lit candles in their windows and stood outside their doors with thermoses of coffee, waiting for orders, waiting for hope. The house had stopped being a home and become a kind of shrine. Eli's drawings, still taped to the refrigerator, crayon rockets and stars with smiling faces, now looked like frozen echoes of a boy who might never come back. The official search began at dawn. State troopers, local deputies, and volunteers fanned out in every direction from the Marwood property. The thick grove of trees behind the backyard was the first focus. It wasn't especially large, but it bordered a wider stretch of woods that followed the town's perimeter. Old farmland, creek beds, broken stone foundations long forgotten by development. Tracking dogs brought in from Columbus caught Eli's scent quickly, tugging handlers down the sloping hill that led into the brush. For a while, it felt like progress, confirmation that Eli had at least gone outside. Hope. But then the dogs stopped. Not distracted, not confused. They just stopped. On a stretch of dead leaves at the base of a tree, one of the dogs laid down, whined, and refused to move forward. Nothing. No other scent trail. No broken branches. Not even the usual indicators that an animal had passed through. The dogs sniffed the air and backed away, uncertain, like the trail had simply ended mid-step. Meanwhile, the police returned to the house for anything they might have missed. The window was thoroughly examined again. No smudges, no pry marks, no scratches on the frame. It wasn't broken into. It had been unlocked. Whether by Eli or by someone else, they couldn't determine. They combed through Lena's computer, phone records, her clinic's security footage, her co-workers' testimonies. They found nothing. Not even a crack in her schedule, not even a questionable email or late-night visitor. Lena's life, if anything, was heartbreakingly routine. A hard-working mother raising a boy alone, clinging to order. But still, the theories began. The media moved in quickly, as it always does when a child disappears. Reporters lined the street, and headlines sprouted like weeds. Ohio boy vanishes from locked room. No signs of struggle. Mother's story under scrutiny after son's mysterious disappearance. Lena went on camera, tear-streaked and exhausted, barely able to keep her hands from shaking. Standing on her porch with her sister beside her, she begged, voice cracking. "Please bring my boy home. Eli is all I have. If someone has him, I'll forgive anything. Just please." But even as she pleaded, the narrative began to fracture. Some networks speculated about a custody battle, perhaps an estranged relative from Adam's side. Others dredged up unsolved cases from nearby states, stitching together a phantom pattern of child abductions that had no real connection. Police squashed those rumors quickly. Eli's father had died in a confirmed car accident in 2005. His family was estranged from Lena and all accounted for. No suspicious activity. No recent contact. No one in the boys' circle had either the motive or the means to orchestrate something so precise, so clean. The FBI joined the case by the third day. Their child abduction response team combed through the timeline with a forensic eye. Still nothing. They reviewed traffic cameras, toll booth logs, service station footage. There wasn't a single unusual vehicle near the house that night, and no sign of Eli leaving or being taken. They dug deeper. Registered sex offenders in the area, recent parolees, delivery workers who had access to homes. Each lead fizzled. No fingerprints, no DNA, no tire tracks, no signs of surveillance tampering. Even the robot recorder, Eli's most used toy, held nothing. The last file had been recorded the day before. A single sentence from Eli, giggling. "You're not supposed to be here." That recording was played dozens of times by different techs. Some thought he might have been pretending, playing one of his games. Others weren't so sure. Weeks passed. Flyers were printed with Eli's face. Bright-eyed, gap-toothed, his name in bold lettering beside a note. Missing. Since April 17th. The school held a candlelight vigil on the soccer field, where Eli had once stood in the crowd, cheering for his friends. Lena didn't speak at the event. She just sat in the front row, holding Eli's backpack, the one she'd found still hung on its hook by the door. The community stayed active at first. Search parties, neighborhood meetings, press outreach. But as the summer heat grew and no new information surfaced, people slowly returned to their lives, their normal rhythms. Except Lena. She refused to leave the house for more than an hour at a time. She believed, insisted, that Eli would come back, and she had to be there when he did. In July, a private investigator funded by donations took over the case. He specialized in missing children, had solved 2 high-profile abductions in the Midwest, and arrived with the kind of confidence the family desperately needed. But after 3 months of work, he too stepped away. No leads, no theories, nothing. The search had changed nothing. By the end of the year, the official designation of the case was quietly amended from abduction to missing person, status unknown. It wasn't closed, but it wasn't active either. A drawer in the sheriff's department bore the label Marwood Eli, thick with paper, thin with answers. And still that bedroom remained untouched. The sheets were laundered but never replaced. The nightstand held 3 books: Where the Wild Things Are, The Solar System for Kids, and Bigfoot and Other Beasts. The robot recorder remained powered off. Quiet, as if waiting. The questions hadn't stopped, but the noise around them had dulled. What could take a child without leaving a single mark? Why did the trail stop at the forest's edge, like the world had swallowed him whole? What if the answer wasn't outside the house, but already inside it? What happened next would make those first 2 days feel like a prelude to something much stranger. They said Eli Marwood was different, not in the way that made teachers frustrated or parents concerned, but in that gentle, almost magical way some kids carry themselves. The kind of child who didn't just look at things, but seemed to see through them. Quiet, yes, but never shy. He had a way of making his presence known without ever raising his voice. A glance, a smile, a tug on your sleeve with a curious question that somehow cut deeper than his age should have allowed. His mother, Lena, would always say Eli was born already thinking. He didn't cry much as a baby. Instead, he stared, those big, amber-flecked eyes taking in everything like a puzzle he was quietly solving. His drawings started early, before he could write his name. Little robots everywhere. on napkins, in the corners of library books, much to Lena's embarrassment, even in the condensation on car windows. They weren't violent robots with lasers or giant arms. They were kind, expressive. One always looked like it was reaching for something. Eli's kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Talbot, kept one of those robots taped to her desk. She'd found it in her drawer one morning with a note that said, "This one's for you because you don't yell." She hadn't, not once. She said Eli could read people like weather, knew when someone was having a bad day before they did. And when she cried during reading time after losing her father, Eli didn't ask why. He just handed her his recorder, pressed play, and let her listen to herself reading from a story the week before. He was curious beyond his years, another teacher, Mr. Voss, later told a reporter. He once asked me if people are still the same when they're asleep, if their dreams make them different. There were countless stories like that, small moments that didn't seem important until they were the only things left to hold on to. His bedroom, even years later, remained a museum of that quiet imagination. The books on his shelf leaned toward outer space, ancient mysteries, and things left unexplained. The Bermuda Triangle, astronauts of the future, and why the moon hides. His walls were dotted with glow-in-the-dark stars, still charged every morning by Lena, even though he wasn't there to see them. And of course, his toy robot recorder, the constant companion, a goofy thing with blinking eyes and a scratchy voice box that repeated everything Eli said back to him with delay. The device became a character in their home. Lena often joked that it knew more of Eli's secrets than she did. He'd use it to leave messages under her pillow when she worked night shifts. "Don't forget lunch," or "I'm not afraid of the dark anymore." But there was one recording Lena kept saved on her phone, the last voicemail he left her before his disappearance. Just a giggle, then his voice singing softly. "If I go too far, don't worry. I'll come back from the stars." It wasn't a song she recognized. He must have made it up. His classmates remembered him fondly. No one had ever bullied him, not because he was popular, but because somehow no one wanted to. "He made you feel like you were already his friend," said Mia Carter, a girl from his second-grade class. She told her parents something strange after he vanished, that Eli had once whispered during recess, "I don't think I'm supposed to be here." When they asked what he meant, Mia couldn't explain. She said it like he had looked through her when he said it. Not scared, not even sad, just like someone reading something already written. Other neighbors described Eli as unshakable. He didn't scare easily. He helped old Mrs. Halberd carry groceries every Thursday. And even when her dog, a barking, slobbering retriever, jumped up on him once, he just laughed and said, "He doesn't mean it, he's just loud." Lena had shared dozens of photos during the investigation. Eli at the science fair with a cardboard rocket ship. Eli wrapped in a towel after swimming lessons, flashing that unmistakable missing tooth grin. Eli on the porch at dusk, legs crossed, watching the sky like it had promised him something, and he was just waiting for it to deliver. But of all the images and sounds left behind, one video, taken just a month before his disappearance, haunted those who saw it. It wasn't unusual. Just Eli sitting cross-legged on his bed holding his robot recorder close to his face. The clip was only 30 seconds. He whispers into it, smiling. "I don't think you're just a toy. I think you're listening. I think you remember things I forget." Then he pauses, looks straight into the camera, and adds, "Don't forget me." It chilled Lena the first time she watched it after he disappeared. It chills her still. Because the recorder had no internal memory. It didn't remember anything. And Eli had never cared about being forgotten before. He was loved, adored, remembered even now. But it was how he said it. Not pleading, not anxious, just resigned. Don't forget me. She plays it sometimes in the quiet of night, when the search updates stop coming and the house seems to press in around her like a closing book. That clip, that phrase, plays over and over in her mind like a loop. Not just a boy saying goodbye, but maybe leaving a message for whoever or whatever was listening. There was no one like Eli, and that's what makes his absence louder than any cry for help could have been. Lena Marwood didn't move away. Everyone told her she should. Her sister, her therapist, even the detectives after the second year passed with no new leads. They said it gently at first, but after year 3, their words grew sharper. You need a fresh start. There's nothing more to find here. It's not healthy to live in the past. But Lena wouldn't leave. Couldn't. Her house on Valley Pine Lane still held Eli's scent, his fingerprints on the banister, his tiny handprints on the hallway mirror, made on purpose after a bubble bath so he could trap his reflection. That mirror was never cleaned again. His room remained exactly the same. The bedsheets, space-themed, scattered with rockets and stars, were washed weekly but never changed. His stuffed bear, named Marbles, still sat in the corner by the window. Every night, Lena turned on the small nightlight shaped like a moon, and every morning she turned it off, as if he might still need it when the sun went down again. On Eli's birthdays, she made yellow cake with chocolate frosting, his favorite, and placed a single slice by the window with a small fork. No candles. That part felt too cruel. As the years passed, the neighbors stopped asking why she did it. Some avoided her altogether. Others offered tight smiles and whispered prayers under their breath when they passed her in the grocery store. Lena had become a ghost in her own town, familiar, unseen. Twice, the case was reopened. The first time was in 2003, when a boy was found wandering in Indiana, speaking in disjointed phrases and refusing to give his name. He was about the right age, but DNA ruled him out. The second time, in 2006, an anonymous letter was delivered to the police station. It simply read, "He is alive, he is close, he sees the stars." It was postmarked from somewhere in Pennsylvania. But nothing came of it. Another dead end in a decade of dead ends. Lena never believed he had been taken by someone in town. That theory, the one the media clung to in the early days, felt too small. There were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no tire marks on the street, no strange figures on any security camera. The house was untouched except for the unlocked window in his room, which had a screen that hadn't been cut, just gently popped out. And then there was the recorder. That plastic robot-shaped toy had been Eli's obsession. You'd speak into it, and a second later it would repeat your words back in a squeaky, robotic voice. Harmless, silly fun. The day he vanished, it was found lying on the floor, turned off. Lena swore she had turned it on when she left the room that night. She always did. It was part of the routine. But when she brought this up to the police, they just nodded politely. What could they do with that? In 2007, out of desperation, Lena reached out to a woman named Corinne, who had appeared on a true crime show. She claimed to be a psychic. Not the storefront kind, but someone who had worked on missing persons cases with a 70% accuracy rate. Lena didn't believe in psychics. But by then, she didn't believe in much of anything except the possibility that Eli was still alive, somewhere. So she called. Corinne came to the house. She walked through each room slowly, her eyes closed, fingers drifting along the walls. When she stepped into Eli's room, she opened her eyes. Then she sat cross-legged in the center of the carpet, right beneath the paper stars taped to the ceiling. "He was taken," she said, "but not by who you think. There's a tunnel, but not underground." Lena asked what that meant, but Corinne couldn't explain. "It's not literal," she said. "It's more like a passage, a way between here and not here." When she left, she didn't ask for money. That same month, Lena started hearing things at night. Faint tapping. Always 3 soft knocks, spaced out like a slow heartbeat, against the window pane in Eli's room. The first night, she sat bolt upright, breath frozen in her throat. But when she rushed in, the room was empty. Nothing but the slice of cake on the sill, untouched. The same thing happened 2 weeks later. Then again, and again, with no pattern. Sometimes it was once a month, sometimes twice in a week. Always at 3:03 a.m., always 3 taps. She told herself it was the wind, or maybe a tree branch. But the trees didn't grow that close, and the sound wasn't random like wind. It was measured, intentional. Eventually, she stopped checking the window when it happened. Not out of fear, but because part of her believed that if she didn't interrupt it, it might keep going. It might one day turn into something more. A whisper, a message. Everyone else moved on. Families left town, new ones moved in. The elementary school got a new playground. The missing poster at the gas station was finally taken down, but Lena remained frozen. To most people, she was that woman who lost her son, the woman who never left, the woman who never smiled, the ghost. But she wasn't done. Deep down, she believed Eli wasn't gone, not really. She couldn't say how or why. She just felt it. That same mother's instinct that told her something was wrong the moment she woke up that morning 16 years ago. That voice had never left her. It had only grown quieter, more patient, waiting. And on the night of Eli's would-be 23rd birthday, as she sat in his room with a cupcake and a single slice by the window, the recorder, the one she had kept in a drawer for over a decade, suddenly clicked on by itself. It spoke in his voice, not distorted, not robotic, just Eli, whispering. "Mom, I'm almost back. If you're still watching this, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one." By the time 2006 arrived, Lena had stopped expecting anything new. There were no more updates, no more vigils. The detectives who had once made weekly visits now worked other cases. The local paper, which had printed Eli's photo on the front page for nearly a year, hadn't mentioned his name in over 3. His story, in the eyes of the world, had faded into the blur of unsolved cases and cold files. But Lena's home remained exactly as it had been on that spring night in 1995, when Eli Marwood vanished from his bed without a trace. His room had not changed. Every sock, every Lego brick, every drawing taped to the wall, all preserved like artifacts in a museum. Lena cleaned it daily, but she never moved things around. She said it was so he'd know where everything still was. The curtains, still the original blue with white clouds, hung slightly crooked from one side, where Eli had tugged them too hard once. His books were stacked in order of his favorites. The only thing she had stopped doing was turning on the robot recorder. It had sat silent on the top shelf of his closet for more than a decade. Until one Tuesday morning in February, Lena had barely slept the night before. Too many memories stirred up from an old home video she found while boxing up storage. In the footage, Eli was laughing, talking directly to the camera, showing off a frog he'd caught in the backyard. "He's my new roommate," he said proudly, cradling it like a glass ornament. The sound of his voice, not the garbled echo of the robot toy, but his real voice, brought on a sudden wave of grief so sharp she had to pause the tape and sit down on the floor. She stayed there for hours, just hugging the VHS against her chest. The next morning, maybe out of guilt, maybe just from exhaustion, Lena decided she would do something she hadn't done in years. Go into Eli's closet. Really go in. Organize. Dust. Clean behind the toys and boxes of outgrown clothes. It was while reaching for a stack of books on the upper shelf that her hand brushed against something familiar. Hard plastic, slightly warm from the sun hitting the wall. She pulled it down. The robot recorder. She hadn't touched it since the police had returned it to her after inspecting it in '95. It looked the same as ever. A scuffed blue body, 2 red blinking eyes, and a silver speaker mouth that had once parroted every word Eli said into it. She stared at it, half smiling through the weight in her chest. The switch was off. Had been for years. She clicked it on just for a moment, almost reflexively. Nothing happened. No sound, no power light. Just silence. Lena exhaled and set it down on the closet floor. She turned back to continue sorting when a sound behind her made her freeze. Click and then static. Faint at first, then sharper. The kind that used to buzz through old television screens before cable took over. She turned slowly. The robot was lit up. Its red eyes blinked, and then clear as daylight, a voice. "Mom, I'm almost back, but he still watches." It wasn't the distorted repeat of a pre-recorded phrase. It wasn't robotic. It was Eli's voice. Not a child's, but older, deeper, heavier. There was no mistaking it. Then came silence. The red eyes dimmed. The recorder shut off. Lena didn't scream. She didn't move for what felt like a full minute. Her heart slammed against her chest like a warning bell, her ears roaring with disbelief. And yet, in that moment, she wasn't afraid. She was grounded. The way you feel when someone grabs your hand in a storm. The words echoed in her mind over and over again. "Mom, I'm almost back." It was the second half of the sentence that chilled her. But he still watches. Lena picked up the recorder slowly, her hands shaking. She examined it top to bottom. There were no new batteries, no power cord. The compartment was empty. The switch had been off. There was no earthly reason for it to turn on, let alone speak. She ran downstairs and tried playing it again. Nothing. No light. No voice. No static. Just plastic and silence. She brought it to an audio specialist in town, someone who repaired vintage electronics and old dictation machines. He opened it up, examined every wire, every transistor. "There's no audio chip in here that would store a message like that," he told her. "This thing doesn't have any memory. It just records and plays instantly. It can't save messages, especially not for years. If it spoke live." Lena didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee and stared at the recorder in the middle of the table, waiting for it to come alive again. Every time a pipe creaked or a breeze passed the window, she flinched. "Almost back," she whispered. "What does that mean, baby?" The next morning, she called the detective who had originally worked Eli's case. His name was Owen Hart, now long retired. He listened carefully, politely. And though he didn't laugh, his voice carried that same heavy sympathy she'd heard for years. "I believe you heard something," he said gently. "But Lena, grief plays tricks on us." "I didn't imagine this," she replied coldly. It was his voice. Detective Hart promised to stop by the next week, but Lena didn't wait. She began digging through Eli's belongings again, scanning every tape, photo, and drawing for something, anything, that could explain what she heard. She contacted paranormal investigators. She reconnected with Corinne, the psychic who had once spoken of a tunnel, but not underground. When Corinne heard what the recorder had said, her face went pale. "You don't understand," she said. "That's not a warning. That's a countdown." Lena didn't ask what that meant. She just went home, and for the first time in 11 years, she opened every window in the house. Lena had never believed in coincidences, not when it came to Eli. Every detail of his disappearance had always felt deliberate. Too clean, too quiet, too empty. So when the toy recorder spoke in his voice, a voice older than the child who had once held it, she didn't hesitate. She placed the device gently in a shoebox, wrapped it in a towel like it was something fragile, and drove it straight to the precinct. Detective Hart was no longer on duty, but he had agreed to meet her there. The younger officers mostly knew Lena by name, by story, or by whispered reputation. A few glanced up from their desks as she walked in. One looked at her hands, then at the box, as if already sensing it was something far more than it appeared. At first, they were skeptical, especially Officer Keating, who had transferred in from Cleveland a year ago and had a no-nonsense tone Lena despised instantly. "You're saying this toy spoke to you after being silent for over a decade?" he asked, arms crossed. She didn't flinch. "It used my son's voice, and it said something specific." He raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I'm almost back, but he still watches." That got their attention. They agreed to run tests on it. A forensic audio specialist named Martin Alvarez, a quiet man in his late 40s with a talent for restoring damaged dictaphones and tracking faint voices in cold case recordings, took it to a secure evidence room in the back. An hour later, he returned, white as a sheet. "There's no power source in the device," he said, eyes locked on Lena. "No batteries, no hidden wiring, no external port. I opened it under camera. It's completely dead." "So how did it talk?" Officer Keating asked, frowning. Alvarez hesitated. "That's what I wanted to know. So I connected it to an acoustic pickup mic, fed it through our digital enhancement software, and ran it through a noise reduction filter. I isolated the voice. It's a real recording, not synthetic, not AI generated. It sounds like a real human voice, just recorded in a space with very strange acoustics." Lena leaned in. "You heard him, didn't you?" Alvarez nodded slowly. "I did, but there was something else. Another voice." The room fell still. He pulled up a file on his laptop, opened the audio clip, and clicked play. Eli's voice came through first, clear, calm, with the strange gravity of age. "Mom, I'm almost back, but he still watches." Then, nearly imperceptible at first, a low humming beneath it. Not mechanical, not feedback. It sounded human, like a voice holding one long note, breathless and eerie. Alvarez adjusted the volume and looped the final 2 seconds. And then, in the middle of the hum, came another voice. A whisper. Male. Rough. "Don't follow." The room was silent again. "Could it be tampered with?" Keating asked, clearly grasping for some kind of logic. "Like a prank?" Alvarez shook his head. "No one tampered with this. There's no memory component, no wireless capability. There's no logical way for a second voice to be embedded in this device, especially one that speaks after the first voice ends." Lena said nothing. She just stared at the toy. The precinct decided to log it as evidence, and Alvarez filed an official report. They placed the toy in a sealed, clear bag, labeled it, and locked it inside Evidence Storage Room B, a temperature-controlled chamber behind 2 locked doors, accessible only by badge ID and camera-monitored 24/7. Lena drove home that night in a daze. She didn't know if she felt closer to answers or just more tangled in the unknown. But a part of her, deep down, believed this was only the beginning. She was right. The next morning, Officer Keating called her, breathless. "It's gone," he said. Lena sat up straight in bed. "What?" "The toy. It's gone. The recorder's missing." She drove to the station immediately. Alvarez met her at the door, pale and tense. Together, they reviewed the security footage from outside the evidence room. At 2:46 a.m., the camera inside the corridor showed nothing but darkness. A flicker. The lights dimmed for half a second, and then the time code jumped forward by 2 minutes. When the footage resumed, the room was empty. No one had entered. No door had opened. But when they checked the shelf where the recorder had been stored, the plastic evidence bag was gone. The box was still there, the shelf undisturbed, but the toy missing. They reviewed backup footage, electrical records, badge logs. No one had accessed the room. No glitches, no intrusions, nothing. Officer Keating stood with his arms crossed, stunned. "That's impossible," he said. "It's not like it got up and walked out." But Lena said nothing. Her eyes were fixed on the security monitor, playing on loop. She could see it in the timestamp. The missing minutes. The darkened hall. She didn't believe it was a glitch. She believed someone had taken it, or something. That evening, she found a small envelope tucked inside her mailbox. No address, no stamp, just her name, scrawled in pencil. Inside, a Polaroid photo. Eli's room. But not as she knew it. The window was open. The bed was made, but different sheets. On the floor, the robot toy, and written on the bottom in red ink, "We told you not to follow. If you're watching this far, what do you think happened to the recorder?" It began with a dare. In the fall of 2007, 12-year-old Tyler Grayson and his cousin Ray were exploring the woods behind Eli Marwood's property, the same forest line that had become somewhat of a legend in their school. Every kid in the neighborhood knew the story. The boy who vanished, the mom who still kept the lights on in his room, the toy that had allegedly talked years later. It wasn't uncommon for teenagers to challenge each other to sneak into the yard after dark, or hike past the rusted fence that marked the end of the maintained trail. But this time, it wasn't just for a thrill. They had a plan. Tyler had brought along his dad's old flashlight and one of those cheap digital camcorders, the kind with grainy night vision and a plastic case that made everything feel like it belonged on a horror DVD menu screen. They wanted to film something, maybe even post it online. If they found anything creepy, even just old junk from the Marwood's shed, it would earn them some points at school. They made it about 40 yards in before Ray stopped walking. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Tyler paused. "What?" Ray tilted his head. "It's like tapping." But Tyler didn't hear it. What he did see was a small knot in a tree just a few feet ahead. The bark around it was discolored, not darker like rot, but paler, like something had been scrubbed or scraped. As he stepped closer, he noticed something wedged into the hollow. It wasn't a nest or trash. It was paper. Lots of it. Cautiously, he reached inside and pulled the bundle out. Dozens of pages folded and crumpled, tied with what looked like old twine. They weren't soaked from the ground or damaged by weather. Somehow, despite the cold and damp air, the paper was preserved. Tyler untied it, and his breath caught. They were drawings, childlike, but strangely detailed. The kind of art you'd expect from a gifted elementary schooler. Some were simple, a boy standing near a house, a dog running across a lawn. But others were different, darker. One page showed what looked like a long hallway, but instead of walls, it was mirrors. Dozens of reflections stretched out in both directions. At the end of the mirrored corridor, a shape stood. Not quite human, but not quite monster. A figure tall and thin, with no eyes, only a sewn-shut mouth stretched across a blank face. Another page showed a boy curled up inside what looked like a wooden box, surrounded by shadows. One corner of the drawing had the word "Listen" written over and over again. Tyler flipped through faster now, his hands shaking. Then he saw it. A signature. Bottom right corner of one drawing, 2 simple initials printed in block letters. E.M. He looked at Ray, who had gone completely still. "Dude," Ray said, stepping back. "Put it back." Tyler shook his head. "No, we have to show someone. This is real." That night, the bundle of drawings ended up at the local police station, sealed inside a plastic evidence bag and tagged under an unofficial note. Found near Marwood property. Possible connection to missing child case. Lena was called in the next morning. She held each page with surgical care, eyes darting across every colored pencil mark. She knew her son's handwriting. She knew the way he drew birds, always with the wings slightly too big, like they were reaching for something far away. She recognized his shaky block lettering. She even remembered one of the drawings, a house on a hill with a telescope on the roof, from a sketch pad she thought had been lost during the original investigation. But here it was, somehow in her hands again, only older, weathered. The paper had yellowed. It smelled faintly of soil and smoke. But the ink was sharp, fresh, like it had been drawn that morning. The forensics team tested the paper. They confirmed it was over a decade old, likely manufactured sometime between 1994 and 1996. The graphite and ink, however, were recent. Less than 6 months. Impossible. Even more impossible, the area around the tree hollow was combed thoroughly by officers. No footprints, no signs of digging, no other items. Nothing. Detective Hart, who had remained in semi-retirement but still followed Lena's case closely, was brought in for consultation. After reviewing the drawings, he met with Lena in private. "You said Eli used to talk about tunnels," he asked her quietly. Lena nodded slowly. "He used to say he dreamed about a place where you couldn't see yourself unless you stood just right. I thought he meant a carnival funhouse." Hart looked at her solemnly. "This doesn't look like a funhouse." He spread the drawings out across the table. There, connecting almost every page, was a shape. A hallway, a door, a forest, a mirror, and always, somewhere in the corner or peeking from behind a tree or stairwell, the stitched face man. A figure now burned into Lena's mind. "I think," she said softly, "he's trying to tell us where he is." That evening, Tyler Grayson posted one photo to his now private blog, the drawing of the mirror hallway with the stitched face figure. It went viral within hours. Thousands of comments poured in, some calling it fake, others claiming they'd seen something similar in dreams or old stories their grandparents used to tell. A few said the figure had no name, but they knew what it meant. If you see it in a reflection, it means it's already seen you. Lena didn't read the comments. She didn't care about theories. She cared about the boy who left those pages. Somewhere out there, Eli was still drawing, still watching, still calling home. For a long time, Lena had stopped expecting calls from the police, or anyone connected to Eli's disappearance. Most of the officers had long since retired or moved on to other districts, the file buried beneath decades of new tragedies, cold cases, and administrative apathy. But in early 2022, her landline rang just before dusk, and something in her chest told her, before she even picked up, that this one was different. "Mrs. Marwood?" The voice on the other end was deep, quiet. "It's David Renner. I was with the department in '99. I handled the early stages of your son's case." She didn't answer at first. The name stirred a foggy recognition, but the weight of it brought an old pain up with it, thick and unsteady, like someone stirring silt from the bottom of a lake. "I remember," she finally said. There was a pause. Then, "I kept something from back then." He explained that during the initial stages of the investigation, they had duplicated all relevant evidence. Audio, photographs, physical samples. When the official case was archived, some materials, especially analog recordings, were returned to family or placed into long-term storage. But Renner, haunted by his own failures, had quietly held on to a single duplicate copy of the recorder's audio, the one from Eli's robot toy. He said he hadn't listened to it in years, not until last week. "I slowed it down," he said. "By accident, really. My grandson was playing around with an old tape player. The speed dial got nudged." Lena listened, barely breathing. "There's a second voice," Renner said, "hidden underneath Eli's." "I heard it too," Lena replied, her voice dry. "No," he said, "not just an echo, a whole sentence." He offered to play it for her in person. That night he came over with the original cassette, an old recorder, and a portable speaker. The house hadn't changed in 20 years. Lena never moved, never remodeled, never sold Eli's toys or packed away his clothes. A faint trace of lavender still lingered in his room, though she hadn't used that oil since the week he disappeared. They sat at the kitchen table, the cassette player between them. Renner pressed play. Eli's voice came through, chirpy, high-pitched, 7 years old. "I'm a robot," it said. "You are too." Then, a garbled flicker of static. Renner slowed the playback with a dial. Underneath the innocent words, another voice emerged. Lower, raspier, like something speaking through a thick veil of fog. "Return what you took." Lena froze. She felt the words scrape something deep in her memory, not just the content of them, but the tone. The sense that it wasn't merely spoken, but meant. That whoever, or whatever, had said those words hadn't been mimicking speech, but delivering a demand. Renner leaned back. "You recognize that phrase?" Lena didn't respond right away. Instead, she stood up and walked to the back door, opening it to face the tree line behind her home, the same one that bordered the forest where Eli's drawing had been found. "I buried something," she said finally. "Years ago, the day after the funeral service we held for Eli, even though we had no body." Renner stood. "What did you bury?" Lena's mouth felt dry. "A necklace. It belonged to my mother, and hers before that. Eli used to call it the shiny moon when he was small. I don't know why I buried it. I just felt like I had to." The following morning, Lena and Renner stood in the yard with shovels. The soil was firmer than she expected. It hadn't been touched in over 2 decades. She dug carefully until her blade struck something hard. A small tin box, rusted at the edges but still sealed tight. Renner knelt beside her as she opened it. Inside, the necklace. A delicate silver chain with a small crescent charm, but beneath it, something else. Lena gasped. Nestled beneath the velvet lining was a single child's shoe. It was Eli's, no doubt. Blue canvas, a little scuff on the toe. The same shoes he'd worn the week before he disappeared. And yet, it looked as if it had just been bought. Not a single crack in the rubber sole, not a hint of mildew, the laces still bright white. Renner stared at it in stunned silence. "That's not possible," he said softly. Lena felt her knees weaken. She sat back on the grass, holding the tiny shoe in trembling hands. "It was buried," she whispered. "I never put that in there. I swear, David, I didn't. Just the necklace." He believed her. The object was sent for forensic testing, but the lab could offer no answers. The material was consistent with early 2000s manufacturing, yet showed zero degradation from time or exposure. No fingerprints except Lena's. No explanation, The next night, Lena awoke at 3:11 a.m. to the sound of tapping. It wasn't coming from the window this time. It was coming from the kitchen. She crept down the hallway. The house was cold, colder than it should have been in spring. When she reached the kitchen, she saw it. The cassette player, sitting where Renner had left it. It was on, playing. No tape inside. Still, from its small built-in speaker, a sound emerged. A whisper. 3 words, so faint she could barely make them out, yet every syllable carved itself into her bones. "He heard you." The recorder clicked. Silence. In the stillness that followed, Lena heard the floor creak upstairs. Eli's room. She didn't go check. Not that night. Because deep down, something told her he was never far. Something took him. But he was still listening. Still waiting. Still watching. There is a stillness to Lena Marwood's house now that feels less like peace and more like the hush before a storm. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, but listens. The rooms remain arranged exactly as they were in 1999, with a carefulness that feels sacred. Eli's bed, the same Star Wars blanket folded at the edge. His plastic toys lined up like tiny, dust-covered sentinels on the windowsill. His recorder, the red and blue robot that once chirped back every word he said, sits on the shelf above the dresser, though no one had dared turn it on since the night it played without a tape. Lena wears a necklace now. Not the crescent moon heirloom she once buried, but a small silver charm in the shape of the letter E. She touches it when she speaks about him, which isn't often, and she never lets it rest too far from her collarbone, even in sleep. She doesn't attend local events anymore, doesn't respond to reporters or podcasters who still call every anniversary, begging for comment. Her phone is usually off. Mail piles up. The only real visitors these days are the occasional neighbor who leaves a casserole or a stack of Sunday newspapers near her gate. No one knocks. No one wants to disturb what the town now refers to, half-whispered, half-myth, as the house that listens back. But one Thursday in late October, nearly 26 years after Eli vanished, something changed. It was dusk, the kind of early autumn twilight where the edges of the trees blur into a soft amber haze. Lena was in the kitchen making tea, the kind of habit you form when you're not expecting sleep anyway. The porch light outside flickered once, then again, and then it went out completely. She noticed it from the corner of her eye, a small thing easily ignored. But her hands froze over the kettle. Because the light had been rewired just last spring. New bulb, new casing, certified electrician. She remembered the receipt. There was no reason for it to go out. She walked to the living room, not rushing, just watching. Through the curtained window, she could see the porch, dim and motionless. And then came the knock. It was not loud, not urgent, but it was deliberate. 2 knocks, a pause, then one more. Lena didn't move at first, not out of fear, not exactly. There was something else in her, something deeper than fear. A weight in her chest that felt like memory surfacing after a long submersion. She stepped towards the door, opened it. No one was there, but something was. Sitting squarely in the center of the porch, perfectly placed, was the recorder. The one that hadn't worked in years, the one that had lit up without batteries, the one that had whispered, "He heard you," just weeks ago. She stared at it. The robot's red eye, the LED light that had long ago burned out, was glowing again. A dull orange, like the last coal in a dying fire. And then, without anyone touching it, it spoke. One word, perfectly clear, "Coming." That was it. No follow-up, no glitch, no warping of the voice. Just that one awful syllable, delivered in a tone that sounded wrong. It didn't mimic Eli's cadence, didn't sound like any child at all. It was flat, cold, more announcement than echo. Lena didn't pick it up. She backed into the house slowly, eyes never leaving the recorder, and closed the door with both hands. She stood there, breathing unevenly, the latch clicking shut like the final line in a story she never wanted to hear read aloud. That night she didn't sleep. The recorder was gone by morning. No footprints in the frost on the porch. No tire marks near the gate. Just the faint, lingering smell of ozone, that static, metal-touched scent she now associated with the moments where reality began to shift. Weeks passed. She didn't speak of it. Not even to Renner, who still sent her short, respectful emails every few months. She didn't tell the local priest who stopped by with soup and a Bible verse. She didn't even write it in the journal she kept hidden behind Eli's bookshelf. But she felt it. Not in the ways you expect. Not a fear of being watched or followed. No. It was subtler than that. It was the sound of silence that didn't seem to end. It was the way her shadow moved a half-second behind her. It was the door to Eli's room creaking open on nights when no windows were open and the house didn't breathe. It was the knowing that something was not finished, that somewhere, beneath the fabric of time and place, beneath the labels of missing or dead, Eli was still in motion. Maybe not as a boy anymore. Maybe not as anything she'd recognize. But something had heard her. Something had taken the message. He heard you. And now something was coming back. Whether that was a reunion or a reckoning, Lena could no longer guess. The last frame of her life's long, fractured film had not yet arrived. And deep in the woods behind her house, the same forest where a shoe had been buried, where drawings had been stuffed into tree hollows, where a camcorder had once whispered forgotten truths, the trees had begun to lean, just slightly, as if listening, as if waiting. The story of Eli Marwood didn't end in 1999. It only went quiet. Until now.